feel like I really understand that we have a responsibility to change the narrative around what we are delivering to young people in the classroom. But I would describe the actual day-to-day learning side of things very challenging.
There is a certain kind of man who moves through the world without making noise. Not because he lacks substance, but because he understands something most people never quite learn, that presence speaks louder than performance. Edoardo Mapelli Mozzi is that kind of man. While cameras have spent decades trained on the Windsor family, cataloging every stumble, every scandal, every moment of royal awkwardness, this quietly confident property developer with an Italian aristocratic title slipped into the picture almost unnoticed. And then, before anyone had fully worked out who he was standing at the altar with a British princess, raising 3 children across 2 families, running a luxury empire worth hundreds of millions, and navigating one of the most complicated family situations in modern British public life, all without once losing his composure. So who exactly is Edoardo Mapelli Mozzi? The answer is far more layered, far more interesting, and honestly far more dramatic than the polished Instagram presence and the impeccably fitted blazers might suggest. Because behind the charm and the monogrammed cufflinks, there is a story involving ancient noble bloodlines, a broken engagement, a son nobody expected, a royal wedding that happened in total secrecy, and a family shadow that refuses to stop darkening the door. Pull up a chair. This one deserves your full attention. Let's begin where all good stories begin, at the very beginning. Edoardo Mapelli Mozzi was born on November 19, 1983, at the Portland Hospital in London, an establishment long favored by Britain's wealthiest and most well-connected families. His arrival into the world was, in that sense, already a statement. But the real story of who he is starts not in London, but centuries earlier, in the aristocratic courts of Italy. The Mapelli Mozzi family carries a hereditary title, Count of the Kingdom of Italy, granted in 1913 by King Victor Emmanuel III. The title was extended to all male descendants of the Mapelli Mozzi line in perpetuity, meaning Eduardo was born a count, whether or not he ever chose to advertise it. Italy abolished its royal titles in 1946 after the monarchy collapsed, but the heritage of families like his doesn't simply evaporate because a law changes. History, once written into a bloodline, tends to stay there. The family's ancestral roots stretch back, by some accounts, all the way to the medieval courts of Sicily, connecting them to European nobility across many generations. They still own a 15th-century estate in northern Italy, the Villa Mapelli Mozzi in Bergamo, which began its life as a monastery and now operates as a high-end retreat and event venue. When Eduardo's people say old money, they mean genuinely, historically old. His father, Alessandro Mapelli Mozzi, known as Alex, is a figure worthy of his own documentary. Born in Argentina, raised in Italy, schooled in England, Alex represented Great Britain in alpine skiing at the 1972 Winter Olympics in Sapporo, Japan. After retiring from competitive sport, he reinvented himself as an international art dealer and became a Fellow of the Royal Society of Arts. Eduardo's mother, Nikki Williams Ellis, built her own career in politics, design, and charitable work, later remarrying and giving Eduardo a half-brother. Between his parents, Eduardo grew up surrounded by ambition, creativity, international connections, and a family culture that treated reinvention as not just acceptable, but expected. Eduardo was educated at the Dragon School in Oxford, one of Britain's most prestigious preparatory schools, before moving on to Radley College, a boarding school in Oxfordshire with a long tradition of producing high-achieving alumni. He then studied at the University of Edinburgh, graduating with a master's degree in politics. He was, by every measurable standard, given every advantage. But here is where the story becomes genuinely interesting, because he actually used them. At just 23 years old, fresh from university and armed with an eye for design, a network of connections, and what can only be described as audacious confidence, Eduardo founded Bonda Property in 2007. The company positioned itself in the luxury end of London's property market, acquiring, developing, and designing high-end residential homes for buyers who didn't need to ask about price. Bonda grew steadily and impressively. By the time Eduardo found himself photographed alongside a princess at formal events, his company had been associated with property developments valued at over $875 million. That is not the trajectory of someone coasting on family name alone. That is the result of consistent, focused, ambitious work over nearly 2 decades. He has been open about the fact that he is dyslexic, a condition he shares, interestingly, with his wife Princess Beatrice. Rather than treating it as a limitation, Both have spoken about it as something that shaped how they think and how they engage with the world. For Eduardo, it appears to have pushed him toward the spatial and visual, toward buildings, interiors, design, in ways that eventually became his professional identity. He is not a man who succeeded despite his difficulties. He is a man who found his direction through them. He has also never been shy about having opinions beyond property. Ahead of the 2016 London mayoral election, he wrote publicly about his views on urban development and central London redevelopment policy. He posted on social media about American politics during the 2016 U.S. presidential election. These are not the habits of a man who intends to disappear quietly into the background of royal life. They are the habits of a man who believes his perspective has value, and says so. Before Eduardo and Princess Beatrice's story can be told properly, there is another story that must be told first. Because the man Beatrice married was not a bachelor with a clean slate. He came, as real people do, with a history. For several years prior to his relationship with Beatrice, Eduardo was engaged to Dara Huang, an American architect educated at Harvard, professionally accomplished, and by any account a remarkable person in her own right. The two became engaged around 2014. They moved in the same elite London circles, they shared an interest in design and architecture, and they built what appeared from the outside to be a solid, serious life together. In 2016, they had a son. His full name is Christopher Wolfe Mapelli Mozzi, though everyone, including his step-grandmother Sarah Ferguson, calls him Wolfie. By 2018, the engagement had ended. Neither Eduardo nor Dara has ever aired the specific reasons publicly, and that restraint says something admirable about both of them. What followed was a shared custody arrangement that, by all available accounts, has been handled with genuine civility and mutual respect. Dara went on to found her own design company, HB Design Group, and has built an impressive independent career. Wolfie moves between his parents' lives, photographed occasionally at family events on both sides, clearly loved and cared for by everyone in his orbit. What made the situation more complicated, and what the tabloid press was quick to notice, was the timing. Within months of the engagement ending, Eduardo had begun seeing someone new, and that someone new happened to be Princess Beatrice of York. The timeline was close enough to prompt speculation, as timelines in these situations always do. Nothing was ever confirmed or denied. The relationship simply emerged into public view, and the world had to catch up. The story of how Eduardo and Beatrice became a couple is not, as it turns out, the story of two strangers falling into each other's orbit through coincidence or luck. The Mapelli Mozzi family and the York family, Prince Andrew, Sarah Ferguson, and their daughters, have been close friends for many years. Nikki Williams-Ellis, Eduardo's mother, confirmed this publicly when the couple's engagement was announced, noting that her family had known Beatrice for the better part of her life. These were people who had attended the same events, moved in the same social circles, and known each other across the years without the friendship ever tipping into romance. Somewhere in late 2018, that changed. Beatrice had ended her long-term relationship with businessman Dave Clark in 2016 and had spent time rebuilding her life independently. Eduardo was navigating life post-engagement with a young son. When they found each other properly, really found each other, it was with the particular clarity that sometimes comes to people who have already been through something hard. Their first confirmed public appearance as a couple came in early 2019. By May of that year, they attended the wedding of Lady Gabriella Windsor together, and the seriousness of the relationship was unmistakable. In September 2019, on a trip to Italy, Eduardo proposed. He had worked with British jeweler Sean Lean to design a custom ring, a baguette-cut diamond in a floral setting, and she said yes. Buckingham Palace made the announcement on September 26, 2019. The wedding that followed was supposed to be a grand occasion. The original plan called for a ceremony at the Chapel Royal at St. James's Palace in May 2020, with a reception in the grounds of Buckingham Palace. It was meant to be a proper royal celebration, the kind that fills newspaper supplements and produces commemorative memorabilia. Two things intervened, and they were not small things. First, Prince Andrew's disastrous BBC interview in November 2019, in which he attempted to address his association with convicted sex trafficker Jeffrey Epstein and instead produced one of the most widely criticized television appearances in recent British public life. The fallout was immediate. Andrew stepped back from royal duties. The scandal landed heavily on his family, and plans for a large, publicly visible wedding for Beatrice were quietly scaled back. Then came the COVID-19 pandemic in spring 2020, which made the original plans impossible entirely. The ceremony was postponed. The grand reception was scrapped. When Beatrice and Eduardo finally married, on July 17, 2020, it was at the Royal Chapel of All Saints at Royal Lodge in Windsor, in a small private ceremony attended only by close family. No public announcement was made in advance. The world found out after the fact. What happened at that quiet wedding, though, became unexpectedly moving. Beatrice wore a vintage ivory silk taffeta gown that had originally been designed by Norman Hartnell in 1961 and worn by Queen Elizabeth II herself to a film premiere. She also wore Queen Elizabeth's diamond fringe tiara, the same one Her Majesty had worn on her own wedding day in 1947. In a ceremony that had been stripped of almost every official royal flourish, Beatrice wore the two most historically significant pieces her grandmother could have offered. The intimacy of that gesture, in the middle of a pandemic, during a period of enormous family strain, remains one of the more quietly extraordinary details in recent royal history. Prince Andrew walked his daughter down the aisle but was absent from the official wedding photographs released afterward. His presence was private, his image erased from the public record of the day. The day belonged to Beatrice and Eduardo, and the family understood why that boundary needed to exist. After the wedding, life moved quickly and, in many respects, normally, which is its own kind of remarkable given the context. In September 2021, Beatrice gave birth to their daughter, Sienna Elizabeth Mapelli Mozzi, at the Chelsea and Westminster Hospital. Sienna was christened the following year at the Chapel Royal at St. James's Palace and was placed in the line of succession to the British throne, moving to 10th position following the death of Queen Elizabeth II in September 2022. In January 2025, Beatrice gave birth to a second daughter, Athena Elizabeth Rose Mapelli Mozzi, several weeks prematurely. The early arrival was frightening, and Beatrice has spoken openly about how deeply the experience affected her. She subsequently took on a patronage with Born, a charity focused on ending premature birth globally, describing the cause as one that had become personally and urgently close to her heart. Eduardo, ever consistent in his support, showed up, as he always seems to, quietly and steadily beside her.